Hello and welcome to episode 49 of the Insider's Guide to Project Cars 2, where today we shall be taking a look at driving in snowy and icy conditions. Now these kind of conditions are really going to test your patience and also your driver's skills, so you'll need to be very careful when driving in these because the grip levels are going to be extremely low. Now, in order to actually survive out there on the circuit, you'll need to be on the right type of tyre. If there's just snow just falling from the sky and none of it is actually settled onto the surface of the track, then you'll be fine driving on a slick tyre up to the point that the snow is actually melting and is forming water on the circuit, and you therefore want to be on a wet tyre. Once that snow does actually start to form on the circuit though, or if you go to the track and there's already snow on the ground, you'll be wanting to use the ice tyre when you're in a race car. If you're in a road car, you have the option to use a snow tyre, and you can use that in conditions that are lower than -5 degrees. But if it actually gets down to -10 degrees on the track surface, things are going to start to turn more towards ice, and you'll therefore need the ice tyres when in road cars. Likewise, when driving on the F.O.O.L ice circuit and the Mercedes ice track, you'll also need to use the ice tyres on those because they have the metal studs. They therefore dig into the surface of the ice and they therefore provide more grip. Now when it comes to driving in these conditions, you're going to need to be ultra smooth and patient, and you're going to need to be braking a lot earlier than you would usually when driving in just say wet conditions. Any kind of inputs that you make need to be very smooth and nicely balanced. You can't go hard on the accelerator or be slamming on the brakes or trying to chuck the car in, as that's just going to break the traction. The car is therefore going to slide and you're going to lose a lot of grip and therefore a lot of time. So you need to be very smooth with your steering inputs. Try and keep the car in a shallower drift or slip angle as you possibly can, and try and keep the tyres actually gripping into the surface of the track. When it comes to the throttle application, you're going to need to be ultra smooth here and very balanced as well. Coming through the corner, you're going to want to be applying just the tiniest amount of throttle just to help claw your way around the circuit, and as you progress out through the exit, you can progressively get harder onto the accelerator, but obviously making sure not to break the traction of the driven tyres and therefore have to fight the car oversteer and potentially end up spinning in the slippery conditions. When it comes to braking, again you're going to want to be smooth here, but also you want to actually have ABS off. This is because when you're running with the ice tyre and you have the ABS off, if you do lock up the wheels, the studs on the ice tyre will dig into the surface of the track and dig into the surface of the ice and help slow you down that way. If you were to leave ABS on, however, obviously if you're applying a decent amount of brake application, then you are going to be engaging the ABS system, as it's going to detect the wheels are actually sliding across the surface of the snow or ice, and therefore the car's going to be scrabbling around trying to dramatically reduce the amount of locking that goes into the tyres, and therefore your braking distances are actually going to increase in these kind of conditions. On top of this, you'll need to be careful as to when you're changing gear when going through a corner. You don't want to be upshifting or downshifting midway through a corner, because that could cause the driven wheels to potentially break traction and therefore pitch you into a even bigger slide. So whilst actually chucking the car in and getting the rear end out and having a really nice drift and sliding around in the snow and ice is going to be an awful lot of fun, it's going to be very flamboyant and showy-offy, it's not productive when actually wanting to set decent lap times and being competitive against other drivers. Instead, like I said, you'll want to be as smooth as possible, try not to lose the traction of the car, and try and keep a shallow drift or steering angle as you possibly can. Just be minimal with your inputs, and that should hopefully get you around the track a little bit quicker and actually prevent you from spinning out and losing control of the car as well. Now when it comes to actually setting up events in order to actually get to the snowy and icy conditions, obviously the F.O.O.L ice circuit and the Mercedes ice circuit are both going to be ice all year round, no matter what date settings you actually set. But a number of other tracks around the world that are featured in Project Cars 2 do allow you to run in snowy conditions as well, and it entirely depends on their actual location within the real world as to whether you can actually get to snowy conditions, whether you can get snow on the ground. So places that are a lot closer to the equator, like the Dubai Autodrome or the circuits that are down in the south of the USA, you won't be able to race in conditions where there is snow or ice forming on the the surface of the circuit. However, you possibly can get snowfall if you did really want it. Whereas other tracks which are further away from the equator up in the north or southern hemisphere, such as Fuji, Silverstone, Brands Hatch, and a few places dotted in around Europe, such as the Nürburgring, you'll be able to get snow forming on the ground when picking certain dates in the event setup. So for some tracks, you'll have the actual season option of snow, which will set it to a predefined date. But there are a number of dates that you can actually set within the custom date setting, which will actually get you snow on the ground as well. Generally, up in the northern hemisphere, these are dates ranging from Christmas Day, which is the 25th of December obviously, through to about mid-January, sometimes February, depending on the actual circuit itself. It's all dependent on the actual track's location and what kind of weather you will experience in the real world in and around those dates for that track. And then down towards the tracks in the southern hemisphere, such as over in Australia and New Zealand, you'll find that the snow season is actually in July. And there is one other Easter egg date, which is probably what you wouldn't expect for those kind of track locations, which I'm not going to reveal to you. That is something that you guys can find out, but it's a single day in the year which, if you were down in Australia or New Zealand, you wouldn't expect to be getting snow on. So there's a little Easter egg hunt for you guys to go on and try and find out when that single day is in the year where you usually wouldn't find snow at a place like Bathurst. Now, one more date related tip that I just wanted to give you guys before we move on to the next bit is with the Mercedes Ice track, if you set the date to any day in January, you will get the Aurora Borealis up in the sky. For those of you who wanted to replicate those kind of conditions that you saw in the early announced trailers for Project Cars 2, January is the month that you'll need to set to drive underneath Aurora Borealis. Now, that is only at the Mercedes Ice circuit and isn't available at any other tracks in the game. Now, on top of the date settings, we actually have the weather settings, where you've got the option of either having just snowfall, which is just going to be a few droplets of snow falling from the sky, heavy snowfall, which is going to be obviously quite a bit more snowfall falling from the sky, and your visibility is going to be reduced as well. And then you also have a full-on blizzard setting, where your visibility is going to be heavily reduced. There's an awful lot of snow falling from the sky, and conditions are very, very tricky and very limiting in how far ahead you can see. So there's a number of different weather settings that you can utilize there, and then depending on what date settings you have and generally what the track's location is actually in and the kind of climate that it has, will determine actually what happens with the whole live track system when it comes to snow on the ground, snow falling from the sky, and everything else like that. Generally, if the circuit is still quite warm and isn't below freezing, so 0 degrees, in and around 0 to -10 is generally where snow starts to form on the circuit. If the track temperature is hotter than that, the snow falling from the sky will just immediately melt and it will remain as water. So it's pretty much the same as just a standard wet race in those kind of conditions, obviously just a little bit colder. If the track temperature is in that 0 degrees Celsius to -10 degrees Celsius bracket, then snow will actually start to form on the surface of the track, and that's obviously going to affect the grip coming from the tyres. It's going to rapidly cool the tyres, and you're likely going to be wanting to switching onto either the snow tyre if you're on a road car, or you'll be wanting to switch to the ice tyre if you are in a race car. Below -10, that's when things will start to freeze, and that's where you'll start to actually form ice. Now, as cars drive around the circuit, just like it does in wet weather, that will lift the snow or the water from the surface of the track, and that's actually going to form a drier or less snowy racing line around the track. And you can see this with the live track evolution. As more cars drive around, you'll start to see that snow start to clear from the surface of the track, especially when there is snow already on the ground and there isn't any further snow falling from the sky. If there is more snow falling from the sky, then obviously the actual rate of the snow being cleared will be much slower than, say, if you were in sunny conditions. And obviously the actual weather conditions, whether it's sunny, clear, overcast, that's all going to affect how quickly the snow does clear, how quickly it does melt. But generally in clear conditions, the snow and the less snowy driving line is going to form a lot quicker than it does with wet weather conditions, for example. And of course, on top of all this, we have all the other usual live track conditions as well. So if you do go off track, you can end up pulling the dirt and dust from the gravel tracks, from the grassy areas back onto the surface of the track. The track's also going to rubber in a little bit as well, and it's generally going to clear the snow layer that is on top of any ice and start to clear it to reveal the ice that's actually underneath. That's a lot more actually noticeable on the Mercedes ice track and the Sampala ice circuit as well, whereas obviously on the traditional circuits it's just going to clear that snow and reveal the surface of the tarmac underneath. Now when it comes to the actual race strategy, it's going to take a while before you can actually swap back to either a wet tyre or onto a slick tyre. Even though there may have been a less snowy line that has formed, the moment that you dip your wheels off of that less snowy line and back onto the snow or ice, you're just going to lose all grip. You're going to have no hope in hell of actually being able to control the car. The car's just going to slide off. So generally it's best to just stay on the snow or ice tyres for pretty much the entire duration of the race until nearly all the snow has melted off the circuit and the track is pretty much completely cleared up, which is going to take an awful long time for that to happen, depending on how cars are driving around the circuit, whether they're staying on the same line and clearing the snow a lot quicker, or whether their lines are a lot more varied and there's generally a wider path that's forming. But generally it is best to stay on the snow or ice tyre for as long as possible, and then only once the track has become very clear and you've got quite a big wide room of margin and just going off the racing line isn't going to dip you onto any snow or ice, that will then be the time to switch to either a wet tyre or a slick tyre, or any other tyre depending on what type of car it is that you're actually driving. So whilst driving in these conditions are going to be very tough, it's obviously advantageous to try it out from time to time. It goes a long way in helping your understanding of car behaviour when driving in very poor conditions, and will just help to overall improve your car control, which could then be useful when driving in wet conditions, or even just generally in the slide and understanding how to correct the slide and get your car back facing in the correct direction as quickly as possible and getting on with the rest of your race. So that's pretty much going to conclude it for this episode. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I should try and get back to you as soon as I possibly can. If you learned something new about driving in snowy or icy conditions, give the video a thumbs up. And of course, if you've been enjoying the content, feel free to consider subscribing to the channel. Other than that, thank you very much for watching, guys. Hopefully I shall catch you in the next episode, but until then, have fun, stay safe, and take care.